It's actually my honor and delight to be asked to do this drilling session with Mr. King. And you know, ESPN, I have to tell a story at least about ESPN, the magazine. Knowing me, Mr. Magazine, I have to bring the magazine business. Michael Rooney was the founding publisher of ESPN, the magazine. And I invited him to come down. Happened to be the weekend where we were playing Alabama. And Michael was so excited, he brought his son, and they came to watch the game and speak to the students. So I called the athletics office. I said, I need 2 tickets to the Ole Miss Alabama game. And the guy at the athletic office said, Samir, you know, we're sold out. I said, for the publisher of ESPN magazine. He said, where would he like to sit? So, I mean, and while probably the majority of people don't know what ESPN stands for, all what they know, ESPN Sports. I mean, I don't know, how many of you actually know what ESPN, the letters, stand for? Okay, 1, 2, 3, like. And the good Professor Tonis. Okay. What does ESPN stand for?
Entertainment Sports Programming Network.
Correct.
Excellent. So on that opening, you mentioned in your speech earlier today that somebody.
I hope somebody hit a light switch.
Yeah, just hit max. Okay, thank you. Okay, rewind. You mentioned early this morning that the very first point is embracing service, embracing the fans, focusing on the audience first. How do you actually put that in practice at ESPN?
Well, first of all, we kind of are fans, you know. I mean, there's generally a lot of excitement every day about what we're covering. You know, probably the unfair advantage that ESPN or any sports network has is most of our stuff sits on the schedule. So we generate excitement about things weeks out. And our fans do too. I mean, they, you know, start a baseball season, if you're a Red Sox fan, you know when the series against the Yankees are coming. So we have an opportunity to get out in front and think about things and think about how we can get our fans fired up. We know when the pro days are scheduled. So we know, like today was Johnny Manziel's day to throw. We knew that was going to be a big deal. We knew last night, Heat Pacers, we were ready for that, you know, months in advance. But a lot of it is also just really paying attention to what the numbers tell us. We get ratings every 15 minutes, and we know, we can tell when people are highly engaged and when they're not. You know, we know the average minute audience on our digital platforms. So we can tell when there's a lot of engagement with our stuff, like tonight at 7:15 when tournament games start, average minute audience will do this, will just take off. We talk about that a lot. We know, you know, people are downloading our apps and how much time they're spending with our apps. There's a lot of data that's part of helping us understand what excites our fans. We know enough about our fans to know that they're generally early adopters of technology. So that gives us permission to play in the app space. We have a lot of younger people walking around our campus who are sports fans. That's good. When you're community you're serving, or it's also the people you sit next to. I don't know. I think from its very beginning, ESPN started as a fan site. This guy, Bill Rasmussen, was a Connecticut sports fan. So he bought some land, and he got some satellite time, and he got some trucks, and he started this network that he was most interested in watching. So it's kind of at our core to be our fans and to behave like our fans. And it's taken us, she really got him a cup of coffee. It's really service.
Thank you.
It is, and by the way, you know, when we got into the magazine business, we knew that we had fans who enjoyed longer stories, a different way of looking at things, maybe not a magazine that was a weekly that was off the news, but a magazine that could anticipate the news and tell different kinds of stories, which is why ESPN, the magazine, publishes bi-weekly rather than weekly. It doesn't seek to be like right off the headlines. It seeks to get out in front. So even now, our magazine strategy is reflective of our audience. Our audience really wants to know what's going to happen. You know, it's not just what happened or how it happened. It's like, what's next? And so we have this whole strategy around the magazine that's built on looking at the sports calendar and saying, okay, people will be thinking about baseball this week, so we'll have a baseball preview. But people will also be thinking about World Cup, and people might be thinking about analytics because there's a big MIT sports analytics conference at the end of March. So we should think about the analytics issue. And we're getting ready to do an amazing issue called One Day, One Game, which really is about not just the magazine publishing a lot of cool pictures and stories, but it's also about people like this notion of touching live games. So we actually publish a live photo gallery on the night of a game, and then we create a magazine a few weeks later based on all the other things that happen around that live photo gallery, because photos are, just like Instagram or, Pinterest, photos are a real communication device. So we plant a flag in that, People like the human form, so we do the body issue, but we do it in a very different, very specific way, which is designed to celebrate shapes and sizes of all kinds and men and women. By the way, that issue is primarily put together by 7 women. So it's one of the reasons why it doesn't feel or read like our competitor who has an issue that's built around the human form. Our approach really has always been to, reflect as broad an audience and do it with the sense of urgency that the audience expects.
Since you mentioned the competitor,
Yeah.
which I will actually go ahead and name, like Sports Illustrated, the weekly magazine that has been published since the 50s. How did you manage to capture that audience today? I mean, when you think of sports today, you think ESPN. Was there like a systematic way that, okay, here's how we are going to forget about the competition, crush the competition, beat the competition, or just we are going to do something different and let the audience decide?
It's a very perilously phrased question. I think the thing I would say is we set out to do something very specific and very different, which is, we started out as a television network, and we were getting as many sports rights as possible and letting you see these sports and athletes as much as possible, longer stretches of the day. And as we got into digital publishing, because we launched our website 19 years ago, we started getting into mobile publishing, and as we started really thinking about how video lives in these other places, and even when we started the magazine almost 16 years ago, our point of view was really about how do we take this volume of stuff that we're doing and find places to go deeper with it. And when we do that, how is that really reflective of how audiences are actually spending time thinking about sports? Because there's a community of sports fans that very few people talk about, but who are driving a ton of activity, and that's gamblers. And there's another community, fantasy, that's driving a new language around sports consumption. And we wanted that to be part of what we were doing in a way that was really, truly integrated and not just hanging off the edges. So we just set out to do things, I think, very differently. And again, we often say that, the core business is not TV, the core business is not .com, the core business is not magazine. The core business is the ESPN promise to fans, the brand promise, to serve fans anywhere, anytime, right? That's our core business. So we're not in the magazine business, we're in the ESPN business. And I think that our competitors start off in different places. Some are TV networks, some are magazines. We just, for almost now 13 years, we've been very clear from the top down, just saying we are a multimedia company. We create an ESPN experience for people no matter where they are. So it's really kind of an apples to oranges comparison.
And I mean, ESPN was one of the few companies that actually freed itself from the platform and start,
Right.
utilizing that brand. Can you talk a little bit about how you created like a second screen, a third screen, a fourth screen? One of the folks at ESPN told me that 19 out of 20 sports programs that are not aired on ESPN
Events, yeah.
are being watched or utilized or interacted with an ESPN second screen or third screen. Can you explain a little bit that and
Well,
how?
I'll get to that, but here's the thing, you got to think about it a little bit differently, all right? So the way we think about it, the first social media was fantasy. It's fantasy football. It chose your own community. You looked at things in very different ways. You know, you looked at the news of the day through a very specific prism. Fantasy was our first social network. So to be in the fantasy space was really important for us to learn about community and learn about how, you know, folks interact with each other when they have to create their own communities. We actually had a whole community group where we had our own ESPN social place where you could log in and rearrange the site on .com to make it look like yours and connect with other folks. It's just from paying attention to what people are doing. And then it comes from being a sports fan. And in some cases, being a sports fan who's a parent or a sports fan who's got another life. You'd be at so many events, other events outside of a sporting event. You'd be at a concert, you'd want to score, or you'd be in a library and you'd want to know who's winning, or you want to catch a highlight. And that just drove us to want to make stuff that would solve that problem. It's just really thinking about the problems that sports fans have. And then, by being aggressive, getting out with our distribution partners like cable companies and just saying, listen, we think we can make something that people haven't seen before, like a Watch ESPN, that people will really want to pay money for. Or people just want to see live games, and there are a whole lot of live games out there that aren't getting broadcast because there's only so many hours. How do we make that available to people? And then we wanted to figure out, are there events and games that are really of global nature that we can't even appreciate what kind of audience they can generate. Last college football season, there was an LSU Kentucky game exclusive to ESPN3 that we put on a Saturday afternoon on ESPN3, and there were more people watching a cricket match directly opposite that LSU Kentucky game because they had access from a lot of points around the globe that outrated the football game. And that's when you start saying, we might be onto something here. This might mean something. So this is really just about meeting a need. I mean, look, if you're watching a game, we can give you a little score panel in the upper left-hand corner. We're running a bottom line on, down here. But you might want to know, what does the overall box score look like? Stats on what the pitcher's, innings pitched are. We've created these experiences like Gamecasts that are really rich, that have all this data, that can sit right next to your television screen and make you feel as though you're getting a much more rich experience. We're doing things like instant polling and asking people to participate with our shows. We did this thing during the Super Bowl where we asked who's going to win the Super Bowl, and then people voted, and whichever team got the most votes, we changed the color of the Empire State Building. So the Empire State Building on that Saturday night for the Super Bowl the lights were green and blue. And we didn't do that. The audience did that. The audience could have made it any color scheme. And just things like we covered this Duke North Carolina game a few weeks ago, and we asked people to send any of their camera video from the game, and we integrated that into the highlights. So key moments of the game, suddenly you had our beautiful HD, and then you had this shaky end of the court camera. But that's because we invited people to participate in how we actually think about our highlights. So, and it's just natural. I mean, look, we don't really talk about second screen, honestly. We talk about best available screen. And for many people, the best available screen may be the smallest screen, the screen in your pocket. Might be a tablet. And what we find are just these new markets at times. People take this new screen here, and then they get in front of the other screen. They don't turn this off. They kind of set it over here. Maybe they're looking for texts or some other communication, but the screens stay on. And we want to be really good about that. We want to be mindful of the advances that are going to happen. More and more people are going to care about AirPlay and spend more time taking content that they're getting from E3 and flipping it onto a big screen and then having it resolved to Gamecast, so they've got multiple experiences. And this goes beyond just ESPN. I mean, think about it. They're going to put screens in your cars. There are people, very awkward-looking people, walking around with screens on their eyes. These are wearables. It's all happening. Right? So you can imagine a world in which, the walls in your home don't have big TVs sticking out the side with wires, but they actually have screens that are attached to Wi-Fi, and you have instant access to information. We're just trying to make sure that we're in that conversation. And like I said, we have an audience right now that's very, very comfortable with technology, so we're taking full advantage of that. And by extension, we're teaching others how they can do it.
So what was the major stumbling block in this, as the technology changed, as the brand expands, as the audience interacts? What has been the biggest stumbling block in
Well, I talked
achieving
about earlier
that?
when we launched a phone so you launched a phone in 2014. Does anybody remember the ad campaigns about mobile ESPN? There was we spent a lot of money on the marketing. It was basically the ad campaign was a guy walking along looking at his phone, and as he crossed the street, an Indy car would zoom by, and then he'd open a door, and a bunch of mascots would run out the door, and he's the whole time he's looking down at his phone. Just incredibly elaborate, mobile ESPN. Then we created a character, I think his name was either Steve or Tom or something like that, who was talking about sneaking onto the ESPN campus because he's just discovered mobile ESPN. We spent a ton of money. And then we got a lot of these phones out there, and they were $399 for the phone, plus a data plan. And people who had phones were like, I can't get out of this one. Why would I spend $400 over here? And they just decided not to. And meanwhile, we had people furiously figuring out really cool content to get into the phone. And people who had the phones were using the content because their data plans were going, psst, but people weren't buying the phones enough to justify the whole thing. So it told us, all right, hold up, we're not a phone hardware company. Okay, we are a content company. So let's look at the appropriate connection between content and product, and what our end is in actually building the product versus our end in figuring out the content piece of it. It was one of the most significant learnings that we've had, because then it freed us up to start thinking about, all right, if we're just focused on the content, we don't care whether it's an Android tablet or whether it's an iPad. We don't care whether it's this brand of phone. We don't care, yes, Microsoft's OS is different from iOS is different from that, and we have to be smarter about that. But we don't have to go out to folks who are making a specific kind of box and tailor everything to them. We've got a content solution that actually goes in more places, and that's when things change.
And what was the most pleasant surprise in your journey?
Oh, I don't know. Clearly, Watch ESPN has changed everything. It's just changed everything. I got 3 kids, right? So first of all, they dominate the television when it's on. Second of all, I don't want them to have the television on all the time. So for me to have SportsCenter or ESPN on TV, I'd be a hypocrite. So, I have a lot of surreptitious viewing, right? Watch ESPN has enabled me at all times to have one eye on what I'm supposed to be responsible for, but not in a way that says, let's sit on the couch and just watch TV. And yesterday we were having this meeting out in Burbank, and a bunch of us ESPN executives were talking about, oh man, it's changed everything for me. It's the best thing ever. But the idea that just, that we can make sure that folks can see SportsCenter regardless of where they are, can see, we've changed it to add highlight clips, side-by-side viewing. We've expanded the notion of what Watch is. Watch has also helped through the Disney company, ABC and Disney, understand how to connect with people on these devices. When we first started looking at it, we were like, yeah, I don't know about tablet adoption. What's tablet adoption going to look like? Now there are hundreds of millions of tablets in the marketplace, and they're just precursing the screens. Like I said, they're going to show up in walls and in store kiosks and in phones. And that has been, it's everything.
So if you and I are sitting here 3 years from now, will you tell us a different story? Will you tell us, well, the printed magazine, there's no need for it anymore. The television channels, nobody is watching TV at home. What's your expectation as an executive for ESPN 3 years from now?
I don't think I'll be saying either of those things. I think that people will be watching television. I think people will be reading magazines, especially our magazine. I didn't mean it like that. Didn't mean it like that. I do think over the next 3 years, the ubiquity of screens is going to change the way people publish, so that they're not trying to publish magazines in the digital space that are built exactly like their magazines. They're going to build more native. Certainly, from our perspective, we think ESPN, the magazine, is a great brand, but what's also a very powerful brand is just storytelling in general. And I think over the next 3 years, certainly at ESPN, we're going to look at all of our long-form storytelling as an experience. So, maybe it carries Grantland branding, maybe it carries magazine branding, or maybe it just carries, read ESPN branding, where you're able, if you like that kind of experience, to just immerse yourself and dip in and out, like watch ESPN. We're redesigning the website. The website, I'll tell you, the thing that's going to be most impactful over the next 3 years is our ability to create a channel of content that is not only personalized, but it's very much about now. I think now is the concept that eludes media companies more than anything else. The ability to create a place where you just go in and you're getting nothing but alerts and personalized stuff and social isn't niche, it's an expectation. It just reflects, like if I said it right now to everybody, all right, I want everybody in the room to hand your phone to the person next to you, you just get skeeved out because it's not your device, there's their fingerprints, the apps are different, it's just, your expectation is to have a personalized experience that is always relevant to you. And mainstream media publishing starts not just with always relevant to you, but here's what we have planned for you today. Okay? And I think that's the biggest media paradigm shift, that you're not waiting for me to tell you what's important. I have the advantage in that sports generally galvanizes communities, so we don't miss that often. But just like Johnny's question earlier about about too much LeBron or too much Tiger Woods, I think media companies got to be really mindful of that. And they've got to figure out a balance. There's nothing wrong with us telling you stories you haven't heard before, breaking news, and coming up with things that are really important stories, so long as we provide an equal balance of you having an easy access to the things you care about, first and foremost. And that's one of the things we're learning about right now with the SportsCenter app. We created all this personalization within the SportsCenter app, and we're learning every day, like we didn't used to have an inbox in the SportsCenter app. When it was ScoreCenter, there wasn't one place where you could go and find all the alerts that you missed. That thing's getting like 18% of the traffic. There's a huge percentage of video starts that are starting not from the main news channel of the app, but from the team-specific pages and the clubhouse pages. So people are saying, no, I'm going to go to my New York Jets page, and that's where I'll start most of the video, not from your main section. So I know that we have a sense of urgency about making that easier for you, and I think you're going to see that in the redesigned website, where you'll see a very clear channel of what we think are the top stories, but a very targeted, here's what's happening right now, and when you personalize with us, and here's the things you care about the most, front and center.
Do you think your audience is keeping up with all these changes, or the changes are moving way too fast for audiences to keep up with them?
Look, all I know is our audiences are very accustomed when they start Twitter, not for it to be something that they have to get around curation. They've already done the curation. Your Twitter experience, you made. Your Facebook experience, you made. And somebody raised the point earlier, you did. The interruptions of advertising and all these other cutesy things that Facebook is trying to introduce in a race to monetize, that's interfering with what you already built in Facebook, which is why some folks are leaving. And which is why folks are spending time in Instagram and some other places, because it's about, this is the experience that I made. And I'm starting, and again, your phone isn't a phone, it's an extension of you. Like, forget handing it to somebody else, lose it for 15 minutes. Think about that. It just makes you uncomfortable. And so when I start talking about, media companies sort of getting that, we don't get that. We're behind the curve on that, because an entire generation of folks have been raised to believe that the first experience is their own. Nobody goes to Netflix without any idea what to watch and just searches it, goes to search. You're going to Netflix for a purpose, right? And Netflix knows you. So if you've watched something, their algorithm says you might be interested in this. Or you're going to hear buzz on something. You're going with a purpose. You're not just going to have Netflix tell you what you might want to watch. It's not, nobody's programming Netflix. I'm going to go to see what's on the Netflix today. Nobody's doing that. And that's just a core experience. My kids say, can I watch a show? Right? They don't say, can I watch a specific show? They're going in because they're going to determine what it is they're watching that day. And I mean, it's one of those things where if you're used to getting up every day and saying the 5 most important stories of the day are X, you're going to be challenged to be relevant.
My next question to you, rose to your position, to your current executive position, from the editorial ranks, from the do you have any fear with this mixing of advertising and editorial, this native advertising that's creeping into the digital world? And if you do, how are you avoiding it at ESPN?
I'm not going to answer this question the way you expect me to. I'm going to tell you that I don't have fear of it, and I'm going to I'm going to spin it. So I was in newspapers for 20 years, okay? I was at the Philadelphia Inquirer, my most recent job. So I've been in 5 newsrooms. And in all those newsrooms, we were very, very careful to separate church and state from the perspective of thinking about the business. I'm not talking about in terms of how we cover the news, but thinking about the holistic business. And I was in newsrooms where the business writers were writing stories about Craigslist. They were writing these long stories about Craigslist and the business around Craigslist, and none of them went into our classified sales office and said, we have a problem. And now you open up a newspaper, it ain't no classified, all right? Because the folks who were actually driving content, who knew what was happening on the street, had no association with the folks who were trying to drive the classified business, and therefore weren't aligned in moving the business forward. We had separate conversations. So we literally, at ESPN Digital and Print Media last year, made ad innovation one of our 5 priorities, along with growing video and redesign and ad innovation. We had 2 hackathons. One was designed around new cool products and experiences. So, you know, folks were creating things like, you know, the ultimate. Well, these guys had a what did they do? They built something that had a breathalyzer and something that measured your pulse, and it had access to like a social network, and it was like the party machine, and you'd watch games, and your blood alcohol content would show up on the screen next to your pulse, like so. It was they built this in 48 hours. All right, so we had this hackathon where we had all these ideas show up around content experiences, but then we had an advertising hackathon. And the way we do the hackathons is we get designers and programmers and content people working in teams on projects. And we did the same thing with the ad hackathon, where we had people in sales and marketing, programmers, designers, and content folks go off and say, all right, what are some advertising experiences we create? And you can see some of them on our air right now. If you go to ESPN.com on certain days, you'll see some of the modules on the front page flip over and show an ad and then flip back and show content. That came out of the ad hackathon, where we were like, how do we grow our business in a way that is, A, a great experience for fans, B, not intrusive when we're trying to drive great content, C, a great experience for advertisers. Because if we didn't do that, somebody would come over here with some ad execution, content person would harumph, oh, you're interrupting with my coverage, and we wouldn't be in it together, okay? Now, these hackathons don't have anything to do with what happens in content. In fact, what we also do is we sit down and we look at the sports calendar, and we identify 35 sport holidays. So it's Wimbledon, it's US Open tennis, it's US Open golf, Super Bowl, what have you. And we start saying, all right, let's look at those weeks. What are the days where we have, you know, on average, the most traffic? What hours do we have the most traffic? And when do we want to interfere with the sports fans' experience the least? They just want to get a score, they just don't want to see a piece of video. And let's block out those hours, and then let's look at the other hours and figure out when do we have the scale, and when can we do something from an ad perspective that is bigger and grander, so that an advertiser will say, yes, I want to spend time with ESPN. And I'll give you a great example. You may not remember this, but we did this when Prometheus came out on DVD. We had this incredible takeover of ESPN.com's site. There was like Prometheus on the side and above, and a big trailer started playing, and then it resolved, and then it went back to ESPN. And I would tell people, you know, I tell people to this day, hey, what was the main story we were covering that day? And nobody remembers, right? But there's a reason nobody remembers, because there was nothing happening that day. It was a Friday, and it was really important it was a Tuesday, and it was really important for that video release to be a smash hit. And that's why we did it. But that's a matter of sitting down as a complete team and thinking about the business. So I read a lot of articles from people in content groups who do not have anything to do with the business, wringing their hands over these scary, infiltrating native ads, and that's not how we do it at ESPN. And I feel that those businesses need to change. Like, I know there's some businesses where, you know, a big part of the digital business is video starts. So you're starting an ad, you know, and then you start a piece of video, and so people just do video online only to start an ad. basically. That's the only reason they're in the video business. And so in some news enterprises, the video group does not reside in the content team, they reside in the business group. All right? So think about that for a second. You know, you've got content groups that are entirely within business, when in fact, what we should really be doing, which I'm proud to say we do at ESPN, is having, you know, team building exercises about here's the state of our business, here's the opportunities for fans, here are days where we want to be great, here's content we're doing that's unlike anything else. How do we get that on a calendar and deliver it in a way that builds everybody's business?
I'm going to ask you my last question, then we'll open it to the public to ask some questions, which is my traditional last question to anybody I interview. What keeps you up at night?
The 1 o'clock Sports Center.